How should I even begin? My parents had just been killed in a car accident, and I was enraged, lost, fully unfettered. There was no lengthy decision-making process or in-depth soul searching. I went into a recruitment office, signed the paperwork, and that was it. I joined the army. It was that simple, at least on the surface. What else was I expected to do? Sit about, drowning in grief, pretending everything still made sense? No, I needed a way out, a purpose, something to block out the noise in my head. The soldiers did not ask any questions, did not demand explanations. It provided me structure, a mission, and, above all, an escape. So, that's how it began. Quite straightforward. On May 1970, during Operation Menu, members of the 3rd Brigade, 1st Cavalry Division decided it was a good day to go fishing. So that is exactly what we did. Of course, by fishing. I mean, we were deep into Operation Fishhook, executing operations in Cambodia. The mission was going well, but we were up against a formidable NVA division. Tough, disciplined, and willing to battle. These weren't ordinary soldiers. They were combat-tested regulars. In contrast, the majority of us remained green. But in Vietnam, it didn't take long to gather experience the hard way while we were stationary. It also implies that we were in the center of the shit, with no way out but by air. So we fought. We got ourselves in some shithole they called a settlement, with residents around. And, while doing something idiotic, I had my photo taken with a tiny kid, about the age of 4 or 5. It was the epitome of folly, yet I did it nonetheless. I leaped up in the middle of a battle, grabbed her, and got her out of there. I mean, I was in the thick of a gunfight, and was ready to piss and shit all over myself. I was so afraid. Except I was carrying this kid who had ended up in the thick of the mess, and was attempting to shoot as I went towards my lines. If you could dial a squad number. Someone took a picture of me with a ball of fire behind me. It appeared much closer than it was, and a 7.6 Tum tracer round from an AK-47 ripped into my side. Yes, we knew it was an AK, because we were using 223s at the time, and the NVA used green tracers while we used red. So in the picture, you can see a green light passing through my side and a red ball of fire behind me. And I held this kid in my arms. It was an incredible picture. And this young kid was looking at me like this. "You rescued me, little dog. Look, it was fortunate that it was a tracer, as it only grazed me. I still have a scar from the burn, but it was a cool photo." You know how kids don't understand anything. I took the kid to safety, and she remained with me throughout the firefight. I even put my vest on her and handed her my steel pot to wear. She looked cute, and there's a picture of her sitting in my lap as I look up over a damn log in a hole, doing my best to play Audie Murphy until we received enough help so I could hand her over to the doctors, who took her to a Catholic hospital for the locals and gave me a fast patch. And because my shift hadn't yet ended, I didn't get to go home. We call this black comedy. Damn. This would be my second Purple Heart. That's one ornament no one wants. What? I didn't think about it till later. Who the hell was the photographer? Why hadn't I seen him? And when did he take these photos? We continued fighting for the next 8 hours until the gunships arrived, and Puff the Magic Dragon descended to pour smoke and fire on the NVA. You needed to see Puff to believe it. They didn't have the 105 cannon yet, but this sluggish C-130, which flew only counterclockwise and with a slow heart, seemed like a real dragon as it opened up with those 220 Vulcan 6-barrel Gatling cannons that fired 6,000 rounds per minute. You only saw smoke and red tracers forming a line you could nearly walk on. If you've ever seen a 0.50 caliber machine gun round, add 10 more, because this bad boy is 60 caliber. It was partnered with a Bofors Fortim anti-aircraft autocannon that was not utilized to shoot at aircraft, but rather some false holes on the ground that mistakenly fell under it and were not American. The Fortim projectile was a 2-pound bursting messenger of death, spewing out 120 shells per minute. It was a cloud of smoke and fire that poured down death on all below. It was a genuine weapons platform capable of flying for up to 5 or 6 hours. And when Puff fired everything at once, all of this hot brass rained down on you as well. It had no defenses. Unless you believe the best defense is a good offense. When Puff appeared, you had conflicting sensations. The first was that you were relieved it was your gunship, but the second was that we were in some serious trouble. They sent Puff out for us. In our situation, the answer was both. Well, the image appeared in a few periodicals, and people saw it. Now I was in trouble. Big trouble. I wanted to work in the army. Maybe I'll receive a commission and spend the rest of my life being cared for or killed. But for the time being, the best I could hope for was to be accepted into the immediate NCO program, where I quickly advanced to staff sergeant level. It was frequently a ticket for a body bag. Instant NCOs were the first casualties in warfare. This is not going to happen to me, boys and gals. Famous final words. So we're still on the operation. We've moved on to another location in Cambodia now that the child has left. And I get hit hard, really hard. Ticket home. Third, Purple Heart and I had extended my tour to include a stop in Vietnam because I am a really dumb man. After all, the NVA knows the terrain, especially after all these years of conflict. And they cite us quite well. There's something fundamentally foolish about going somewhere where no one looks like you, and we get to wear uniforms that tell the locals we're not them. We could as well have been dressed in bright red coats with white belts forming an X over our chest. I'm not wearing any of it, but wide eyes and GI issue clothes mean shoot at me. So I end up with a bunch of holes in me and my blood in their mud, and I'm in big trouble. Do not believe what you read about morphine. It does not operate very well. A medic stabilizes myself and those like me. Then, it's a wonderful flight in a helicopter dodging ground fire. Sometimes they don't go to a field hospital, and then one in Saigon. From there, on to Germany. Back then, all of us who were wounded were sent to Germany or the Philippines before returning to the United States. People are now seeking for me, and they are angry. The picture appears to be a problem. Some relatives see me and make reports. Congressmen have been contacted. People with more stripes than a zebra talk at me rather than with me. Keep my mouth closed. These were my orders. And that's it in a nutshell. Do not die, hang in there, but keep your mouth shut. Months later, I was standing in front of the Secretary of Defense, having the Distinguished Service Cross pinned on me. And I was promoted to Sergeant First Class, which is 3 stripes above and 2 rockers below the pay grade of E7. There are just 9 enlisted pay grades. When that was completed, I was surrounded by a shitload of command sergeants, major. That would be E9 3 up, 3 down, a star in the center with a wreath around each side of it. A sergeant major is an enlisted man's general, and they will remind you if you forget. They were all wearing sibs, which are combat infantrymen insignia. The scariest aspect was that they had 2 stars on the darn things. Shit, these guys went through WWII Korea and now Vietnam. They were some awful guys. Each had a purple heart with stars on it. DQ's silver stars are bronze stars with V devices. V stands for valor, as in having it in combat and every other decoration imaginable. Another ribbon with stars against a background of blue shit, the Medal of Honor. I stood at attention and saluted when I saw it, as was necessary. How in the hell did I miss that? When I met with the Secretary of Defense, I knew I was being ambushed, and it was by the greatest. I had no idea when the shooting would commence, but there was no way out of this one. I was only along for the ride. I followed them as they escorted me through the Pentagon. I was still moving slowly, but they would not let me stop. I obtained a fresh picture and was given a gray ID card. It wasn't intended to be gray. They were all happy to pass me off until we arrived to this one unique little chamber. I named it the Attitude Readjustment Room. You are paying attention, Sergeant. Listen, you little jackass. You screwed up our army. You jackass. Yes, you're a hero. Who the hell is not? But goddammit, you're out of here. As of now, you will keep your mouth shut forever. Do you read this, young SFC? I only had one response. Yes, Sergeant Major. In a very loud and clear voice, I moved to and then stood in the rigid but comfortable stance of attention. Feet at a 45-degree angle, head and gaze ahead, fingers softly clasped, and thumbs alone. The seam on my trousers. Hell, I had so many people yelling at me that I couldn't tell who I was agreeing with, but I agreed. It was a picture. That terrible photo. Yes, it got me promoted to SFC and possibly got me the DSC, even though what I accomplished was barely worth an Army Commendation Medal with a V device, and it got me acknowledged. You see, I was just 16 years old when it was taken. I was just 15 years old when I used the birth certificate of my older brother, who died shortly after birth, to join the Army. Now I've gotten tossed out. But because of the photo, the attention, and my wounds, I received a disability retirement and a 100% disability rating since I was shot up and killed. I was fortunate that I did not dodge enlistment, but I now had a pension. At 16, there was hell to pay, and I was in it. So the military followed the tried and true rule throughout, and that is what they did to me. How can you return to high school and complete your sophomore, junior, and senior years after spending time in a conflict zone covered in dirt and chaos? You do not. I was a prisoner awaiting a prison. I had already gained my independence by that point. There is no home to return to, no one to guide me, and no true purpose other than survival. What was I supposed to do? Sit in a classroom and pretend like I belonged there? The truth was, I'd seen too much and lived too hard to go back to being a normal kid. My world had altered, and so had I. After what I call my attitude readjustment conference, things settled down in that room for the rest of my active duty military service. About 2 more hours. Actually, you were gone at midnight, but no one was going to wait for that. I told them I loved the Army and wanted to stay, but that wasn't an option. I had my one and only drink in the United States at that conference, and I gave the toast Infantry Queen of Battle, which they were pleased with because they were all infantry and wore the insignia. I couldn't keep the blasted whiskey down because it burned like hell. That was my final drink for many years. I was given some levis, a shirt, and a few other items, and told I was a civilian. It appears that the sergeant major took a liking to me, since I was given a place to reside and a military school to attend, and I fit right in. Except at this school, I was not required to wear pretend decorations. I wore the genuine thing, which kept me out of the hazing situation, including the teachers. Every battle veteran treated me with some level of respect. Hell, all I ever did was get shot at and hit 3 times, with one resulting in a minor scratch. I finished high school at a military academy in Georgia for 2 years before being advised that a military college, but not a commission, was in my future, or that I could attend a traditional civilian college. I chose the military one, but I'm not allowed to reveal the name of the college, but its initials are VMI. I even did OCS, but only for drills. I was not desired in the Army, Navy, Air Force, or even the Marine Corps, but the Army takes care of its own, and I was now clearly adopted. During this period, I also visited a restaurant in New York's Chinatown, but it was not Chinese. It turned out to be a Vietnamese eatery. Anyway, the husband and wife were squabbling, so I interrupted and told them what I wanted. I was tired of waiting. They paused and simply stared at me. Then they asked me a few questions about my order, which I answered. Then I stopped. I had spoken to them in Vietnamese. I had not even considered it. It's just happened. Since then, whenever I had the opportunity, I would visit a Vietnamese restaurant. The language was second nature to me. It must have had something to do with the fact that I learned it so young. Remember, I was just 15 when I went, and I still am. So now I am 22, 6 years have gone, and I have a job in the defense business back home in California. And at that time, the conflict was ended. Okay, that war is over, and they will not allow me play in any future wars. Women and children come first. Then they'd ask for me. I earned a degree in engineering and worked on military projects. For whatever reason, I had a relatively high security clearance, despite my small blunder of utilizing my deceased brother's birth certificate to enlist at the age of 15. But I was depressed. That was my excuse. My parents were dead, and I was depressed, so I enlisted. This is a military career in the Army. I was 15 years old and had been in a war for more than a year. I earned the DSC, 3 Purple Hearts, the CIB, and a few other awards before retiring as an Easeman. SFC at the age of 16, all because I did something idiotic, such as picking up a child in a combat zone rather than keeping my number low. Hell, they are not permitted to put you anywhere near a conflict zone unless you are a teen. Damn, that was a brief career. That was a nice deed that did not go unpunished. So at 22 years old, I had a degree and a fantastic job. I was in Southern California, so I purchased a 2-bedroom house at Redondo Beach. As luck would have it, the space next door became available, and I sold it to the person from the bank who was in Korea. First calf, just like me. So he approved both loans. So now I had a nice-sized piece of property, and I went on a construction frenzy, resulting in 4 bedrooms, including the master bedroom. I also included a pool, swim lane, and jacuzzi. I left the second house alone and rented it, but the backyard was tiny. I utilized the most of it for a pool and a few other projects. This was where I wanted to stay. I wasn't concerned about any property lines because I built where I wanted to. I owned it all. The space was too large for only me right now, but I planned to establish a family and fill it with children. I am now 24 years old, and my building phase has ended. Now we're in the living phase. But I needed aid. I went down to the Vietnamese center to ask if there was somebody who could be a live-in housekeeper. The older, the better. I seem to spend a lot of time visiting Vietnamese centers and destinations. In Vietnam, I sort of matured into an adult. There was a lot of discussion going on, and I was assured they'd locate someone for me to speak with. So they got me a nice elderly woman of around 150. Okay, she looked that elderly. She was nice, and I moved her in to keep the space clean. I called her back, which is my method of mispronouncing the words grandmother or elderly woman without specifying which side of the family she comes from. She would call me Chow, which means grandson, but I was a very small boy, grandson. She usually smiled when she said that, so I knew we had a connection. She also did some cooking. I had developed a taste for Vietnamese food, with the exception of 100-day-old eggs, also known as 1,000-day-old eggs. If it is more than a few minutes old, I do not consume it. I despise that and refuse to eat an egg that had been buried for 100 days. Then you get to taste the putrid dead duck and smell it. I'll never eat that again. Way too salty, too. I spent just as much time on a military base. I retired from them. I shopped there and received my medical checkup. They were a part of my domestic life. Fort MacArthur, Long Beach Navy Station, USS Repose, and hospital ship. Even the Los Angeles Air Force Base in El Segundo. I was home with the military. During this time, I went on dates. I was in high demand, employed, unmarried, and had a home. The first person I fell for was Lita. By then, I had reached the age of 26, and, honestly, she was all a boy could want. She was 22 years old, tall, red-haired, with a huge frame, a waist you could wrap your hands around, long legs, and a propensity for serving the best darn BJs this side of Saigon. We spent so much time together that at the end, we were both weary and barely able to move. After 6 months, we agreed on a date. I said, "No good, Shell." She kept saying no, but I was doomed to mess up my life on my own. One day, I received an envelope with images. I didn't like them. They were 4 by 5 glossy prints, 20 or 30 of them. Back then, there were no digital prints or emails. I went to see Lita at her parents' house, and we had a really candid conversation. I wanted my engagement ring returned. It was not going to work out. We should both move on. Her mother and father were incensed. Lita was outraged. "Lita, are we supposed to be exclusive?" I asked. She agreed. We were. "Who is this? Lita?" I inquired as I provided a photo of her with a man who was clearly not me. Standard garbage was the response. Just a pal. Nothing occurred. We just happened to meet and say, hey, I just met him once. Where did I obtain it? It was normal stuff. Are you following me? I never answered any questions. Daddy was upset that I was doubting his daughter. Then I showed her another photo of her with a different man. And the same answer. Lida. You can tell they were photographed at different times based on the attire they were wearing. My second query came when I showed her 2 more photos of her with the same men. Of course, she agreed. So, did you meet them more than once? Again, there was some consensus, which was unusual considering we had only met once. I flung the remaining images onto the table, and her entire family sat there, stunned by what they witnessed. Lida was speechless and remained in a daze. She looked at me as I asked, "May I have my grandmother's engagement ring back?" Without saying anything, she slid it off and handed it to me. I walked away and never communicated with her again. I never told anyone why we split up. If somebody inquired, I simply replied, we decided it was best to move on. But I knew the truth would eventually spread. People talk, she talked, and her friends talked. And eventually, so would her family. But it's not because of me. I just wanted out, and I got out. I never found out who sent me the images, but I was delighted I received them. It became quite odd with anyone I got too close to. I'd obtain a picture, a tape recorder, or whatever to prove that I was becoming too close to someone I shouldn't be. I never became engaged again. I simply moved away from that person as if it were nothing at all, just moving forward. There was no confrontation, just called less often. Fewer dates until it was history. As time went, it nearly became. Her name was becoming slower, so when she requested for help in this large mansion, I consented. After a few weeks, we finally had a new house guest. Her name is Lean. She is 16 years old and attends school here. She is also Vietnamese and a really nice girl. She has everything a girl needs and does everything they do. She is quite attractive and has many dates, but she also keeps up with her education. I try to remain out of her way, and because I am not her father, I do not teach her how to live her life, but she does an excellent job of it. She is like a guardian to her. We have dinner and go out together. And when I say together, I mean all 3 of us. I don't date 16-year-olds, but it's not uncommon for all of us to sit down for a dinner together at the end of the day and discuss what's been going on. Leon was like having a younger sister around. On 1 week's notice, I let her have sleepovers and pool parties while attempting to remain away. I don't allow children to drink, and I would know if they did. I don't drink, and there is never any alcohol in our house. Narcotics are constantly available, but I do not allow them. Leon is a little rebellious, but no more than any other girl her age. During this period, I fell in love again. I was 27 years old, and it was time to settle down. I met Selena at work. Selena was tall and blonde, with a petite frame, a small waist, and long legs that she enjoyed wrapping around me. She was a southern girl, with a charming accent and a gentle voice. There were times when you could barely hear her. She was also smart, very smart. And she was really knowledgeable about her job. This was a mother who will produce some bright children. Yes, I wanted children. We dated several times before I asked her if she wanted to come over to my house to hang out and have a little barbecue, and she accepted because the event was not until Saturday and it was Friday, and going all the way from Hermosa Beach would be difficult. It was decided that she would stay with me on Friday night. She considered it and agreed, because only an idiot would want to drive so far. She spoke with a smile and a tender kiss. We made a brief stop at her house before driving the 2 miles to my house. Selena was quite talented in the sack. We ate and screwed each other for an hour. I took a nap, woke up, and did it again. Around 7 a.m., I went up and gave it to her once more. It'd been a while. Selena fell back asleep, and I took a shower and went to cook breakfast, but she only stared at me when she saw me that morning. Leon has girls over, and they will be awake shortly. Shit, she was correct. One of the never-ending parties that young girls throw. Oh, shit. This is my home, and we can share. The master bedroom was specifically intended to be separate from the others, for when my wife and I want to have fun without telling the kids what's going on. I made some breakfast and returned to the bedroom to serve my new lover. Selena was one of the few people who had seen my home. We had breakfast in bed. Then I told her the bad news. All of the kids would be at the house. She replied everything was fine and she would handle it. We went to the beach and ran for 5 miles before walking back to the home. Selena looked gorgeous in a damp sports bra, and her long legs shone from the exertion. She was neither pale nor overly browned. She wore nylon running shorts that opened at the sides when she ran. I had a difficult time sprinting with enthusiasm, but I managed when we returned to the house. The party was in full flow. Selena and I showered, cleaned ourselves, and went outside to watch the craziness erupt in my backyard. There were approximately 30 to 50 high school students there, but no official head count was taken. But she seemed to know exactly where everyone was. The girls were dressed in what they called swimwear, and the boys were not much better. If I had to guess, a large number of the so-called high school boys had not attended school in at least 2 years. There were the typical antics, such as someone asking for help putting on sunscreen, youngsters throwing each other into the pool, and a game of Marco Polo in which touching the other person appeared to be the primary goal. Typical. I couldn't help but remember how much easier things used to be when introductions were easy and you knew precisely what to anticipate. I was ready to get some food for Selena and myself when I noticed a ruckus in the butler's pantry. Opening the door, I noticed one of the boys getting way too near to Selena, clearly breaching the line without missing a beat. I just said, "I will call you a taxi," and closed the door. Leon was standing nearby, keeping her normal, silent observation. Then, with a chuckle, she opened the door again and said, "You're a taxi." Before giggling to herself, this toddler watched much too much TV, without hesitation. She strolled over to the phone, dialed yellow cab, and provided our address. 5 minutes later, she had Selena's clothes in a paper bag and delivered them to her. As the taxi drove up, strangely, Selena did not leave the butler's pantry until the ride arrived. I could hear her talking to the person inside, muttering something about Vietnam, and fighting with a few other harsh things. When Selena eventually went outside, the guy raced in the opposite direction. Needless to say, there was no conversation. No stroll to the taxi, no goodbye kiss. And I didn't give her money for the taxi. It was just 2 miles. Leon took my hand and brought me outside to a ready deck chair, offering me an iced tea. She still seemed melancholy, but I persuaded her to have fun. When I reflected on it, I had another close call. But that's what dating is for. Leon would occasionally peek across at me, but all I could do was grin and wave back. It wasn't like someone was going to shoot me. There was a Love's BBQ on Hawthorne Boulevard, so I went there for dinner and let the celebration continue without me. I did eat a rack of pig ribs and some beef ribs as filler, and brought a bunch home for lunch the next day, which they scoffed at, claiming they were overcooked and had too much sauce on them, but man, I thought they were good. Sunday, the family attended church, and I submitted a check to the Catholic hospital in Vietnam. Leon inquired about it, and I informed her that I provided them $20 per week because they had taken care of someone for me and were likely still doing so. And if not her, then somebody else. And they did not squander the money on drugs and sex, and their boss did not require a new Cadillac. He had a fiery chariot, or something like that. Selena arrived to work on Monday and appeared to have had a horrible weekend. Probably brought the lad home and screwed her into bed for the rest of the weekend. I didn't disregard her when it came to business. It was business, but there was no banter, and everyone noticed. I never mentioned anything about it, and disregarded any questioning. I saw her and the boy driving away from the parking lot together a couple times, but it seemed to end after about a month. Dumb bitch totally messed up. 3 months later, Selena had gained significant weight and sought a leave of absence. It was time to become serious about my work. One decided to leave my job and start consulting. Every time I went to a reunion with the guys, I got a lot of offers. I saw the sergeant's major for my attitude readjustment conference at least once a year, as well as the guys from the old unit and those I'd never met before. There would be formal dances, and I would wear my dress clothes and a black Stetson, which was customary for the first calf, but not actually issued. It was enjoyable, but I always went stag. Anyway, I had met some fellow troops, and their offer of consulting work eventually reached me, and at the ripe old age of 27, I quit my job, kept my security clearance, and entered the military consulting business. I was making twice as much money for half the labor, but I had to deal with all of the paperwork and taxes. But in the end, it was worthwhile. I was about to turn 28, and Leon was reaching the end of his final year of high school. We were enjoying supper when she began discussing her senior prom. I hadn't paid much attention until my name came up. This led to an unexpected conversation. Apparently, Leon thought I should accompany her to the prom because she didn't have a date. That did not add up. She had lots of guys interested in her at 5 feet tall, an inch taller with heels, weighing barely 100 pounds, with long, straight, dark hair, almond-shaped hazel eyes, and naturally, sun-kissed complexion. She turned heads everywhere she went. She had plenty of fans. Still, she was 18, and finally, I consented to go. With everything out of the way, Leon decided to properly prepare me for the prom. We attended dance lessons together. I already knew how to dance, as did she. But we needed to dance together, so we got ballroom dancing lessons. Then Leon suggested that we should practice at home. We did that every day. She soon put on her heels to ensure she was practicing properly. She was luring me in with deliberate precision, almost like a strategist putting a strategy into action. Then she decided that every time we got together, we would always do a dance. She did date, and I saw her out in little skirts and revealing tops, and I had to admit that I felt a little jealous. She informed me it was going to be formal, so I needed to dress accordingly. I begged off wearing a light blue or pink tuxedo. She saved me by emphasizing that I should wear my uniform and being very clear. She preferred that I wear the nicest dress and my first cavalry black Stetson rather than a tuxedo. We had about a month till the prom, and we were already dancing non-stop. I must admit that constantly holding her in my arms was having an effect on me. Then there was the time she decided we should dance in the pool. We were both in bathing suits, holding her in my arms and moving to music that only we could hear. I felt her flesh in my arms, her body curved against mine, flesh to flesh, my hands roving over. First her back, then down to her gorgeous buttocks, and back again. I could feel her breath against my chest. The 9-inch height difference didn't matter to either of us as she rested her head on my chest. Our movements gradually decreased until we were just standing there, arm in arm. I gazed down at her, and she looked up at me. It was slow motion for me as I lowered my head, and her lips approached mine. They touched so gently that I almost doubted they touched at all, except for the shock I received. I felt her pucker and tenderly kiss back at me, as if moving too quickly would end the mystical spell we were both under. We both resumed the kiss, but this time with extra intensity. The pressure had become more intense. There was no doubt that we were both preparing to totally accept what was occurring to us. We broke up, and I stared into her eyes. Not a word was spoken. She and I moved further closer to one another. Our lips parted. The richness of her breath awoke my desires. Her warm flesh amplified the sensation. My tongue briefly entered her mouth, only to be met by her own, which sought access into mine. Her arms moved around my neck, holding me to her lips. We broke the kiss, and she gazed deeply into my soul, finding what she was looking for and pulling away from me. She and I were separated by a wall, and the gatekeeper's name was Bar. I was standing there, observing as these events occurred. Leon began to walk back to the home, but then stopped and held my hand, and we walked behind the house. We were just inside the door when I pulled her back, and as she returned to me, her arms rushed to surround me, while mine tried to draw her into my hold. This time, our kiss revealed a growing and unbridled passion. I brought her into my room and placed her gently on the bed. "Are you in?" I began to question, but was stopped short when she drew me into a kiss. "Are you certain about this?" I finally finished. She kissed me again. This time, with greater conviction, I had my answer. "Are you okay?" I started another question, but she interrupted me again. "No, but I have never been with anyone before," she admitted. My expression must have astonished her, as she quickly added, "Not with a guy, nor with a woman. Only with a boy, someone about my age. Just a boy." I laughed, thinking that if her only encounter had been with someone young and inexperienced, I had a lot of work ahead of me. I lifted her up and carried her into the bathroom, where we stepped into a warm shower and let the water run over us. We took our time cleaning away the dust from the day. The jacuzzi tub gradually filled, bringing a relaxing atmosphere to the moment. We exchanged soft, careful touches, learning the contours of one another's bodies. Her physique was fragile, and her actions were both interested and timid as she ran her hands over my scars. She paused and traced them with her fingertips. When she stroked the deepest one by my side, a faint, unspoken pain flashed through her eyes. "You're gorgeous," I told her softly. "Any artist would like to capture your image. You're perfect." She gripped me closely, and as the water cascaded over us, I realized something I hadn't truly grasped until then. "I love you, Leon," I whispered. "I hadn't realized it before today, but I know I do." She didn't say anything immediately. She just embraced me, as if the words alone were sufficient. I sensed a breeze, but paid little attention to it. We had a quiet moment to explain how much we meant to one another. After rinsing, we exited and proceeded to the jacuzzi on the counter, where I had prepared plates of fresh fruit, strawberries, melons, cherries, cut pineapple, and Cece's chocolates. There were also drinks, apple juice, orange juice, grape juice, and even plain ice water, clearly approved of us and the change in our relationship. I assisted Leon into the jacuzzi, offering her a strawberry and a piece of chocolate. Then, a sip of orange juice, all between warm, affectionate kisses. She leaned into me, first facing me, then resting against me, allowing me to gently brush my lips across her neck and ears. Her silky black hair clung to her damp skin, enhancing her already beautiful appearance. "Leon, I'm not sure when it happened, but I fell in love with you," I said as I held her tight. "I'm not a naive kid. The present moment is not transient. It is entirely up to you to walk away at any time. But for the time being, I am completely devoted. This is not about anything temporary. It is about something real. Let's take our time and appreciate it. No rush." Leon melted into my touch, her body relaxed and warm as I held her close and brought her to bed. She pulled a towel off the rack, and I gently put her down, drying her off carefully from the bathroom. I got a bottle of scented massage oil, lightweight, silky, and ideal for relieving tension. I poured a tiny bit into my hands and massaged it into her skin, massaging her shoulders, arms, and back slowly and deliberately. Her muscles responded to my touch, resulting in a small moan of happiness. I moved down her arms, across her hands, and along each finger, making sure every part of her felt the warmth and care of my hands before turning her on her stomach. I continued the technique, rubbing her back and legs with the same slow, precise motion. She felt fully at peace. She breathed deeply and steadily. I worked my way down from the base of her neck to her feet, taking my time and making sure no part of her was overlooked. When I rolled her back over, I massaged her legs before progressing to her waist and stomach. My hands move in smooth, rhythmic patterns. The warmth of the oil and the gentle, attentive massage left her completely calm. Her body was fully at rest. She met my gaze with gentle eyes full of trust and warmth. I gently kissed her forehead and then her lips, marking the moment with silent devotion. She reached for my hand and gripped it strongly, as if she didn't want to let go. As she rested, I remained beside her, feeling the rise and fall of her breath. the warmth of her skin, and the peaceful silence between us. She soon turned and wrapped her arms around me, kissing me before falling asleep. We awoke less than an hour later, still intertwined in each other's love and bodies. However, all of the sweets that we had left in the bath were now on the side table next to us. I scooped her up and took her back into the shower, where I gently cleansed her body as she washed mine. We took our time, making it a trip of discovery. When we were finished, I dried her while she dried myself in the bedroom. The bed had been replaced and remade. I must be quite pleased with this. I fed my love some of the leftover sweets. We dressed and walked together to the poolside area. It was there that Ball intervened once more, bringing us beverages and some delicious Vietnamese foods. We invited her to sit, but she simply smiled, kissed us both, and returned inside. Leon and I held hands as we looked out over the pool, then decided to go to the beach, leaving Bob alone with her thoughts and without ours. We stepped out onto the Manhattan Pier and watched the men fish for what would undoubtedly be their food that night. Leon and I embraced as we stood looking out at Santa Monica Bay and into each other's eyes. She would glance up at me, and I would know, so I would kneel down and kiss her lips. This was a public kiss. No deep tongue duels occurred. I touched her face with my fingers, tracing the gentle curves of her smile. I bent down and kissed her again. This time, without any indication that she wanted it, I wanted it. She responded to the kiss with more than equal emotion. Leon, I'm in love with you, but you must attend school. I would prefer that you travel locally, but you must go. UCLA and SC are wonderful institutions. You must understand yourself. I was unsure how to proceed. She needed to learn about life. It was hilarious, but she could speak flawless English when she wanted to also play the broken English game if necessary. We communicated in Vietnamese. Paulo, I love you. You are my life, and I will attend school locally and share your home and bed. I won't marry you till the timing is right. But from now on, I am solely yours. Leon. From now on, I am exclusively yours. And when you think the time is appropriate, I will become your husband. Nobody will come between us, and we will live as man and wife until you decide to marry me and become my wife. Or you opt to go on. I am yours. She kissed my lips very lightly. I wasn't sure what to make of it. Then we strolled hand in hand back to the car and then home. It had been our home in less than a day. She told me she had another party scheduled on Saturday, and did I object? When we got home early, I wanted to change into something else, but instead of going to her room, she entered mine. During our absence, the bar transferred everything into it, transforming it from mine to ours. That weekend's festivities did not include any pool time. It was to demonstrate that Leon was not the lady of the house, and I believe all of her girlfriends recognized this. She was accompanied by at least one girl when she changed her clothing, and they did it in our room. Leon was glowing all day as she played hostess. The problem was going to be next weekend, so I booked us a room at the hotel where it was going to be held. There was no need for a limousine. We drove over the night before and stayed there. We were both above 18, so there was no difficulty. I got us a penthouse suite. I still wasn't sure what Leon was going to wear, but I'd find out soon. She had me depart after I dressed in my best dress uniform. It's a tad showy, featuring light blue slacks with a gold stripe and a deeper blue cutaway jacket, and all the medals and accolades. In miniature, however, rank chevrons are worn on the upper arm sleeve, as with all other arm insignias, including time in service and time in combat regions, rather than a regular hat, because I was the 1st Cavalry. It was a black Stetson with a yellow cord to indicate that I am an infantryman. I waited outside the suite in a chair that I had brought out. Leon and her girlfriends were getting ready inside. When the door opened, there was the usual selection of miniskirts, off the shoulder, and strapless prom dresses, but nothing like Lillian. She donned a traditional dye, Vietnam's trademark outfit. It was the first time I'd seen her in traditional Vietnamese clothes. The gown was composed of pure white silk and had a fitted bodice fastened with exquisite gold and silver crystals. that cascaded down to the floor. It was intricately embroidered with the same gold and silver threads and finished with matching piping. We all die. Hers was cut from the waist down on both sides, allowing for easy mobility while displaying the gorgeous white silk slacks underneath. The effect was stunning. She appeared to glide into the hall, wrapped by layers of silky fabric, almost as if floating on air. She finished her ensemble with white, silk, high-heeled shoes. And at that moment, I realized why we had rehearsed dancing with her in heels. Her hair was also fashioned traditionally, separated in the center, long and straight, and falling over her shoulders with delicate gold and silver threads weaved into the braids. The supper was fine, but the dancing was fantastic. She melded into my body as we danced, and a few of the males wanted to dance with her. But I'm a pick. I want it all. I merely told them no, and Leon grinned as she returned to resting her head on my chest. When one of the guys mentioned that I was being overprotective, Leon responded that I had always been protective of her, and as far as she was concerned, I couldn't be too protective. As the evening came to a close, I asked Leon if she wanted to go to one of the suites that her friends had leased for the night, but she rejected. "I want to go back to our own room," she added loudly enough for the others to hear. We entered our room, and she melted into my arms. I helped her get out of her dress, and she did the same for me. As we stood there in our formal attire, she laughed and stated, "Most girls have a big first on prom night, but I've already had mine. However, I have a small surprise in the form of a playful wiggle." She strolled over to the nightstand, removed something, and returned with her hands behind her back. When I went down to kiss her, she returned it before unveiling a small gift she had prepared specifically for tonight. The night was leisurely and deliberate, full of laughing and shared experiences. I made sure she was comfortable at all times, taking my time to ensure that the experience was enjoyable and memorable for her. By the time we entered the shower, we were both smiling as the warm water washed away the anxious tension of the night. Moments like these, where intimacy and humor go hand in hand, are very special. I awoke in the middle of the night, and we made love again. And at 7 o'clock, our breakfast arrived. Leon remained under the covers. The waiter smiled. We ate breakfast on the terrace, holding hands and kissing often. How many ways can you tell someone you're with that you love them? I'm not sure, but between us, we had to approach the hundreds in both words and actions. Around noon, it was time to leave. We packed our clothing in carriers and had the bellhop take them away while we changed into something less formal, but still appropriate. On our way out, we came across Leon's companions, who appeared absolutely fatigued. We joined them for lunch. Leon and I felt renewed and energized, whereas they were worn out. That was our pattern for the following 2 years. Leon concentrated on academics while I ran my consulting firm. Whenever I could plan a trip out of town during her vacation or school holidays, we traveled together. I never left her behind. We were always a team by the conclusion of her second year. She kissed me and whispered, "Yes." I already knew what the question was, because I had asked it often. I asked her to marry me again and handed her my grandmother's ring. It was a massive wedding, and I believe the majority of Vietnam, as well as everyone I'd ever met, attended. Half of the 1st Cavalry was also present, as were some of the sergeants major who kicked my butt in DCth day I received my retirement orders. But that is not the narrative. Leon had urged me to prepare a handful of 20s for our wedding night. She had a surprise for me. We ended the dinner about midnight and returned home. We would leave in the morning for our honeymoon. I wanted a surprise. She went into the bathroom to prepare, and I used the other one, but I'm not sure why. When I returned, a pair of Army-issue green boxers was sitting on the bed, a pair of unusual green socks for combat boots, but no boots. Also on the bed was a gun belt and a strange green fatigue garment, combat issue with staff sergeant and yellow chevrons on the sleeves. Yes, there was also a Stetson there. I yelled at Lee, asking what was going on. She instructed me to look at the image on the table. Yes, there was a picture of myself in the NAM. The major one. I despise it, she told me. Not that one, but the one beneath it. There was a photo of me as a staff sergeant in a Stetson, bullshitting with some of my guys in the field. Now I get it. I had already stripped down, so I put on an abbreviated Army uniform. Leon asked whether I was ready, and when I responded yes, she opened the door and stepped out. This was not surprising. She wore white vinyl go-go boots with 3-inch platforms, garters, nylons, tight, short shorts, and a cowboy vest. She crawled up to me and said, "Don't go boom boom cowboy." I just nodded. She gave a sly smile. $30 cowboy. And I will take care of you. I dug into my pocket, pulled out 2 20s, and gave them to her. There's no need for change, cowboy. I will make it worth your time. Before I knew it, she was already at work, working on her practices. Just when I was about to lose myself in the moment, she looked up and inquired, "Want more cowboys?" A little extra for 50. I handed her 3 20s. No change, cowboy. That simply implies I will take my time. She assisted me in removing my gear, placing my belt and shirt aside before pushing me back onto the bed. "Leave the hat on, cowboy," she remarked with a wry grin. Every now and again, her gaze shifted to the photo of me with my friends. She moved confidently, taking charge and mirroring every motion as if she had done it 100 times before. She achieved her own pinnacle before I did, but I caught up quickly. "Another round for 50 cowboys, and I will take care of you again," she offered with a knowing smirk. I handed her additional money without hesitation. No changes were expected, and I did not request any. After we finished, she stretched out next me, her fingers drawing patterns on my skin. "Husband will be home soon, cowboy. Time to shower and leave." I followed her into the bathroom, where we helped each other clean up. As warm water rushed over us, I felt the tug of temptation again. "I'm out of money, but I wouldn't mind having another go before your husband returns." I admit it. She giggled quietly and shook her head. "Cowboy, you have no money and no additional time. My husband receives it for free. If a man wants anything extraordinary, he must pay." I was curious, so I inquired, "What will you do with the money?" She smiled. "My husband will shortly make me a mother. Need baby clothes?" By the time we were finished, exhaustion has set in. I brought her to bed, knowing we had an early departure in the morning. As I laid beside her, my gaze was drawn to a photograph of me with my old pals. She grabbed my glance and whispered, "I love you, husband. Always have. Always will." Something about how she looked at me cut deeply. It was a look of gratitude and devotion. I looked at the photo again, then back at her. The weight of the past and present weighed down on me as I hugged her tight. It finally clicked. I finally received my wedding surprise. It was your gaze that saved me. The puppy dog appearance. Why hadn't I seen that before? Did you finally figure it out? "You are a giant dummy." My bride replied with a smile that matched your amazement. "I adore my surprise. Lean had loved me since the day I saved her. I didn't even know her name. She got the word out, and the Vietnamese community refused to let me marry the wrong person. I guess that's why the photographs and recordings kept appearing. How did they accomplish that? When it was all done, the American Sergeant First Class was attacked and defeated by a small girl who was only 4'11" and 10 years his junior, but she prevailed with superior tenacity and unending love. Perhaps that's not such an awful picture. After all, here's the next story. Miles is a busy businessman and father of 3. He constructed a solid existence through years of hard work, ensuring that his family had all they needed. He wasn't wealthy, but he earned enough to afford a decent home and a happy life for his wife, Katie, and their 3 children. He valued family, responsibility, and doing the right thing. But Miles wasn't simply concerned with his own household. He also cared for his younger brother, Harrison. Harrison had always battled to establish his foothold, moving from job to job, never completely settled down. Miles, the trustworthy older brother, jumped in to help. He hired Harrison and provided financial help. He believed he was doing the right thing by keeping his brother close from the outside. Miles had a picture-perfect family, including a devoted wife and joyful children. But behind closed doors, things weren't as they appeared. Miles had no idea that his wife and brother were keeping a dreadful secret that would shatter his entire existence. Miles never questioned anything during the first year after the birth of his youngest child. He adored his children and saw no reason to compare them to him. They were his, and that was all that counted. But as the months went, something began to feel odd. The child did not have the same traits as his elder two. Miles possessed strong, distinct facial features, including deep-set eyes, a sharp jawline, and somewhat hooked nose. His elder children inherited some of his characteristics, as well as Katie's softer features. But there was nothing but Miles in this child's face. At first, he dismissed the concept. Genetics can be unpredictable, correct? Maybe the youngster resembled someone from Katie's side, or the resemblance would become clearer over time. He convinced himself that he was overthinking things, but then the comments began. Relatives, friends, and even coworkers who had seen photos of his family made jokes. Wow, this one doesn't look like you, some chuckled, dismissing it as innocent banter. Others joked about how much the infant resembled Harrison, Miles's younger brother. That's when the unease escalated to suspicion. Miles grinned throughout the chats, dismissing it as family DNA. But deep down, it troubled him. The more he gazed at the infant, the more he realized how much he resembled Harrison. They have the same eyes, nose, and even small mannerisms. His mind raced, but he had no proof, just an unshakable gut sense. He told himself he was being foolish. Katie had never given him any cause to suspect her, and Harrison was his brother, whom he had supported and trusted for many years. But doubt is like a splinter. It burrows in and won't leave. The more Miles attempted to ignore it, the worse it became. So one day, unable to suppress his thoughts any longer, he made a choice. He requested a DNA test for each of his 3 children, not just the youngest. While he was intrigued, he required answers. When Miles received the results of his DNA test, he had no idea what to expect. He ripped the envelope open and scanned the document. His gaze darted through the technical language before landing on the truth, a reality that shook his entire belief system. His youngest child wasn't his. The words blurred on the page, and his mind reeled in astonishment. He double-checked the statistics and comparisons, hoping that there was an error. But science did not lie. However, that wasn't the worst part. The biological match was clear. The child remained a member of the family, but not as his son, as his nephew Miles' breath hitched. His brother Harrison was the father. A wave of nausea struck him. His mind initially rejected his wife Katie's sexual relationship with his brother. Harrison was married. He had a lovely wife and his own 4-year-old child. He had no cause or excuse to do this. Miles had given him everything, welcomed him into his company, and helped him get back on his feet when he had nothing. He cannot possibly do this. He reflected on his gorgeous wife, Katie, the lady he had loved and trusted, and with whom he had made a life as the mother of his children. She can't casually cheat on him or carry another man's child while claiming it's his. He refused to believe the report. These people cannot conceivably betray him, but such an event is still possible. He'd read stories and heard news about scenarios like this. Instead of throwing everything away and pretending nothing happened, Miles chooses to investigate deeper. He was unwilling to make allegations without strong evidence, until one evening, when his opportunity presented itself. Katie was seated on the couch next to him, scrolling through her phone as usual. A notice appeared, and she immediately swiped it away. Her face is unreadable. Miles observed her from the corner of his eye, pretending not to notice. A bit later, one of the kids beckoned her from upstairs. Without thinking, she got up, leaving her phone on the sofa. For the initial few seconds, Miles. His physique is tense. He only had a few minutes, if that, before she returned. He reached for the unlocked phone. His fingers moved quickly. Opening her messages, he browsed through the normal texts, her friends, school updates, and reminders until he came across the name Harrison. His fist clenched around the phone as he opened the chat and skimmed through the messages from his wife and brother. And that's when the truth hit him in the stomach. The communications were not simply past discussions. They were recent. They'd been meeting in his own home, bedroom, and space. They weren't sneaking away to hotels. No, they were doing it at home when he was at work and his children were at school. Not every day, but frequently. Enough. Enough to establish a pattern, a prolonged, deliberate betrayal. Miles heard footsteps coming down the stairs. He barely had time to lock the phone and return it to the couch before Katie re-entered the room. Miles swallowed, his wrath seething within him. He wasn't simply hurt, he was outraged. That night, Miles lay awake and stared at the ceiling. How long has she been doing this? How long had he been played as a fool? The thought made his stomach turn. He'd spent years creating a life for his family, only to discover that the two people he trusted the most were tearing it apart behind his back. For the first time in his life, Miles felt helpless. He'd always been the one who mended things and solved issues. But this was not anything that could be fixed. No apologies could reverse what they had done. But he refused to be the fool anymore. Miles wasn't about to face them right now. He had witnessed men explode in the midst of betrayal, yelling, shattering things, and demanding answers, only to be given more lies, justifications, and manipulation. No, Miles was not going to let them get out of this. He wanted undeniable proof. He intended to expose them in a way that would leave no room for doubt. So he decided on revenge. Miles went to work the next morning. As Katie was taking the kids out, he purchased covert cameras that are small and unobtrusive enough to blend into the background. He knew precisely where to position them: the living room, corridor, kitchen, and, most significantly, the bedroom. It took him a bit to set things up, positioning the cameras so they would not be spotted. He ensured that they had remote access, so he could review the footage from his phone whenever he wanted. He waited for days afterward. Miles checked the recordings. When he hooked into the live feed, his heart pounded. The waiting was agonizing, but he reminded himself to be patient. After a week, it happened. Miles had left for work that morning, but his instincts had warned him to examine the footage. He took out his phone and opened the app, and his breath stuck in his throat. Katie and Harrison were in his residence, in his bedroom. His blood became chilly. It was clear what was going on. It was all caught on video. That morning, Harrison informed him that he was taking his wife to the hospital. He had looked him in the eyes, lied without hesitation, and then come right here to Miles, his bed. This was it. He needed proof. The betrayal was clear. And now? They were now going to pay. Miles is debating whether to confront them immediately or expose them publicly. After days of deliberation, Miles decided on his next step. He planned to lay everything out in front of the family so there would be no space for excuses. He picked up the phone and began making calls one at a time. He invited every important family member. His parents, Katie's parents, aunts, uncles, and even cousins had always been close family members. He informed them it was urgent, which was exactly what they needed to hear. By the weekend, almost everyone had assembled at his parents' home. Miles sat at the head of the room, his expression opaque. Harrison was there, acting normally. I was completely oblivious of what was ahead. Katie sat alongside him, seeming content, unaware that her world was going to be crushed once the room was full and the murmurs had subsided. Miles cleared his throat and stood. "I need everyone's attention," he murmured, his voice soft yet heavy. "There's something you all should see." Curious faces turned towards him. Harrison leaned back in his chair, arms folded, and Katie gave him a puzzled look. Miles took out his phone, plugged it to the television, and pressed play. The room became silent on the screen. The hidden camera footage was shown in full detail. Katie and Harrison are in Miles' bedroom in his home. Every nasty private moment is documented for all to see. Chaos erupted. "What the hell is this?" One of the relatives shouted. Harrison's wife let out a piercing yell, hiding her face, as the reality dawned on her. Her husband, whom she trusted, had been sleeping with her brother-in-law's wife. Katie's mother broke down in tears, shaking her head in bewilderment. Miles' father stood straight, his mouth knotted in barely suppressed rage. Then began the yelling. How could you do this to your own brother? You invited him into your home, Miles. You trusted him. This is disgusting. Shameful. What surprised Miles the most was that not everyone agreed with him. This is not something that should be discussed openly. One of Harrison's uncles mumbled and shook his head. This should have been handled discreetly. Another relative attempted to downplay the betrayal, mumbling on how mistakes occur and how the family should find a method to correct them. Miles' hands tightened into fists. Fix it. How would you fix something like this? His mother, distraught, went to Harrison with tears in her eyes. Tell me it isn't true, she whispered. Harrison opened his mouth, but no words emerged. He gazed around the room at the evidence flashing on the screen, which showed the faces of his family. The individuals he had lied to betrayed him, and for the first time, he had no way out. Katie sat frightened, helpless to defend herself or Miles. He remained silent, watching them drown in their own shame. Miles came out of that family meeting with a clear head and a singular goal: to make Harrison feel every ounce of the betrayal he had caused. It was not enough that the affair had been revealed. It wasn't enough that Katie and Harrison were humiliated in front of their entire family. Miles intended to ensure that his brother paid for what he had done, so the first step was to cut him off totally. Miles had been a long-time supporter of Harrison. He had given him a job at his company, assisted him financially, and even covered for him when he made poor business decisions. Harrison never had to struggle because Miles was always ready to catch him. But with that safety net gone, Miles contacted his legal team the next morning. Every financial relationship he had with Harrison was severed. Harrison was dismissed from the business. Any money Miles had loaned him in the past was deemed a debt, and he made certain to recover it. Harrison's assets through Miles' company were blocked, and his brother was officially on his own. Harrison initially assumed Miles was lying. He came into the office hoping to talk things out, but security halted him at the threshold. His name has already been removed from all official documents. Miles had spent the whole night making certain of it. Then came the final blow. Miles had always admired Harrison's wife. She was a caring, intelligent, and dedicated mother to their child. She didn't deserve it any more than he did. So he contacted her personally. He extended her an offer. He promised her that he would fund all of her legal bills. Hire the greatest divorce lawyer you can find. Take what you can from him. At first, she was shocked, but then rage set in. She accepted the deal. What ensued was a harsh, drawn-out court fight. One Harrison was totally unprepared. Whilst his wife had a team of top-tier lawyers, he could hardly afford the essentials. His financial situation was rapidly deteriorating. His assets were divided, and he was losing control over everything. The court decided in his wife's favor. She received full custody of their child, the house, the car, and a sizable share of his remaining assets. Harrison was left with nearly nothing save his clothes, a few personal things, and a ruined reputation. Harrison was not simply broke after the divorce was finalized. He was totally destroyed. Miles, too. He saw everything unfold without regret. Miles had already devastated Harrison, but there was one more person who needed to bear the full consequences of her crimes. Katie wasn't going to walk away from this situation unscathed. She had lied to him for years, slept with his brother, and brought another man's child into his family on false pretenses. He had no intention of allowing her to keep anything he owned. Weeks following the family meeting, Miles met with his legal team. He demanded full custody of his 2 biological children and refused to negotiate. He'd already obtained all of the proof he needed, including DNA test results, hidden camera footage, and text conversations. Katie was shocked when she received her divorce papers. Perhaps she assumed Miles would, given that he would let her stay for the sake of the children. She was wrong. She attempted to apologize. But Miles was not interested in anything. She had something to say. She had already shown to be a liar. He was not about to let her influence him again. The court processes were quick and severe. Katie lacked the means, so Miles attempted to fight for shared custody. but the evidence against her was overwhelming. The judge had no tolerance for a woman who not only strayed, but also invited her husband's brother into their married home to prolong the affair. Miles has full custody of their 2 children. The house remained his. Katie was forced to leave, taking just the child that was not his. She got away with a small settlement, hardly enough to start again. Most people would have stopped there. Miles had ruined Harrison's finances and prospects. He had deprived Katie of her comfort and security. But Miles was not done. He understood how people like Katie and Harrison functioned. They'd try to go on, recreate themselves, and if nothing had ever occurred, Miles was not going to let this happen. They had destroyed his life, and he was going to make sure they felt the consequences of their betrayal for years to come. So he made sure everyone knew the truth. Miles boosted the story and spread naturally, planting the proper information in the appropriate places. He gently revealed the facts to common acquaintances, colleagues, and members of their community. He provided proof to those whose opinions mattered: Harrison's former business partners, Katie's social circle, and anyone who attempted to defend them. Harrison quickly became a pariah. He was once regarded in his business, but suddenly doors were closing on him everywhere he looked. People refused to work with a man who had betrayed his own brother in the worst way possible. His reputation had been shattered. Katie did no better. She was once a woman who thrived on social acceptance and position, but now she drew hushed murmurs and disapproving eyes. People distanced themselves from her, refusing to connect with someone who had been found sleeping with her husband's own brother. She attempted to rebuild her life with the little she had left. No stable home, no financial cushion, and little regard from those who formerly respected her. Miles did not have to lift another finger. Their downfall was complete. And as he glanced at his children, safe in the home he still owned, he knew he had won. And there, my friends, is how Miles exacted revenge on those who deceived him. He did not act in a fit of wrath, nor did he allow emotions to cloud his judgment. He had intended. He carried out the execution. Finally, he walked away with everything, leaving them with nothing. His brother lost his wife, money, and reputation. His ex-wife lost her home, her stability, and all prospect of healing the damage she caused. And throughout it all, Miles made certain that the people who mattered understood the truth, guaranteeing that they would bear the consequences of their actions for years to come. Thank you for listening to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Also, leave a comment below to share your thoughts on what happened. Take care.